Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin, and today I want to talk about some fairly recent footage of an alleged Sasquatch from the Autrain Falls, which is in Wisconsin. Just kidding, it's in Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, and it's way up there, you could say, in between Marquette and Sault Ste. Marie. The Autrain Falls have a little hiking path, and of course, its eponymous waterfalls. And that is what a gentleman named Rodney was filming in 2022 when he may have captured something else on his cell phone camera. Here it is. And this is slowed by about 80%. Right there. I know. But just bear with me for a minute. Hear me out. First, I want to play the sequence a few times at normal speed. Then I'll enlarge it. And obviously from the footage you can tell that he didn't notice it until reviewing it later. And he wasn't there to get footage of Bigfoot, he was just filming the falls. It is a pretty place. So you're probably thinking, why on earth are you showing this to me? But let's zoom in. Okay. So, maybe you can already tell why this gets pretty interesting quickly. When I first saw this little clip, I thought it was rather lame, but then I did a bit of examination, and it's actually fairly interesting for a number of reasons. But first, let's get the detractors out of the way. Let's look at what makes the video not so great. So first off, the setup is sketchy as anything, or at least it seems that way. So it starts with the waterfall, and then he films this mysterious and titillating stack of rocks. And it's easy to say that he set that up to make the scene look more Bigfoot-esque. Then he pans down the river for no particular reason. And that's where we see the thing for approximately 3.642 seconds. At the way top of the frame. And then he pans to the caves. Then he films the waterfall once again. So the whole three-step sequence just seems like a lovely farce, right? First he looks at the falls. River pan with random rock stack and vague alleged beastie. Then spooky cave. And back to the falls. That's the first red flag, some would say. Red flag 2, I suppose, is that the witness also pointed this out as a potential object of interest to Kelly at Rocky Mountain Sasquatch Organization. This is a screenshot, but let me see if I can find it. I guess here. Well, just because I was curious or maybe petty, one of the two. I found the same spot, but it is a different angle. I couldn't find the exact moment. But you have the big tree, smaller tree, close tree, branch, and dark spot. And I'm quite certain that's merely a shadow. But who knows what lurks in that which we cannot see? Personally, I believe darkness is as deep as you can dream it to be, but that's just me. And then, of course, the third red flag, and perhaps the most glaringly obvious, is the subject's lack of detail, and even the subject's lack of movement, because I don't think it moves at all. I mean, look at it. Slowed and stabilized here. But as for the first, the sketchiness of the sequence going from falls to river with a brief view of the subject, then to the cave, and finally back to the falls. Well, according to the dialogue between the videographer and Rocky Mountain Sasquatch, he didn't attribute the rock stack to Bigfoot. The videographer didn't even mention it. Obviously, it could be the handiwork of Bigfoot, as such behavior should be expected from a creature of such description. But mysteriously stacking rocks also fits the behavior of a far more common beast, for all sorts of motivations, many of which have nothing whatsoever to do with farce. That's something any kid would do at a riverbank, so it very well could be a coincidence. As for panning down the river, well, the video clip is a total of 4 minutes and 5 seconds in length, and it's easy to say, of course he just happened to be filming that one spot for no reason. And it's like, okay, but that's what he was doing. I watched the whole 4 minutes several times, and it follows a relatively sensible narrative arc. He was just filming everything there was to see, starting with the falls, then the riverbank, then the river, then the caves, then back to the falls. Some scenery, and then cut. End scene. As far as I'm concerned, the setup is neither here nor there. As for the thing he points out as a potential other Bigfoot, well, I suppose it's possible. Anything is possible after all. But in my mind, at least, when you start making claims about stuff like this, your credibility goes down a bit, but only in one way, you know. The credibility as an observer goes down, but to me at least, your credibility as honest, or as someone who tells the truth, goes up considerably. Liars, in my experience, tend to be rather calculating. They know what they're doing, and usually they are self-conscious or defensive to an extent. It seems unreasonable to me that someone who is trying to pull off a lie would then add this bit of silliness to the equation. I think that for whatever reason this caught his eye as something with a profound shape. We shouldn't give it much thought, lest we feel rather silly. I would say the same thing if this was allegedly a picture of a bear or a tiger or something. Though in the witness's defense, a shadow may very well be evidence of something very real, and the credence you give it may have grave impact on your immediate well-being, even if proof it is not. You don't need to be an animal behavioralist to know that all sorts of creatures seek concealment and cover, and even any child can tell you that danger lurks in dark places. So I don't know. Let me know what you think of this, or rather, claims about this, the shadow. Is it a blatant and desperate attempt at attention, or an honest spillage of excitement? Personally, I lean to the latter. After all, I know people who live up here. Now third, and surely the most interesting, this, the thing. Now we get to the creature. So, it looks awfully familiar. Obviously, it looks exactly like Patty, the Patterson-Gimlin creature. To the point that, if it were a photo and not a video, I may very well suggest Photoshop, at least before doing this analysis here. But not only is it similar to the Patterson-Gimlin creature, but it is similar to all apes. These are photos I took at a zoo with an iPhone X at a range of 30 to 60 feet depending. And let me tell you, the faces, or the heads, are eerily similar, in my opinion. The sagittal crest, the ridge, the rise, dip, and rise. The shadows where they should be, and the gloss where it should be too. The rump is so large that it casts a shadow on the hamstring. And this also speaks to the quality of the video. Obviously, this quality is absolute garbage. But I took these photos at, no more than 50 feet. They were photos, not video. With no obstruction, and with consistent lighting, and in an environment designed for clarity. So yeah, a video that made no attempt to focus on the subject, at a farther range, in a worse environment, should look very much like this. And call me cray-cray, but it almost looks like the right arm is extending and pushing against this log. And most importantly, perhaps, I can't help but notice that this can't be a suit. It's impossible. Maybe not impossible, but perhaps close. If I overlay a human head in the same direction, the eyes cannot fit there, and allow for a human forehead. See the white space where the forehead is? We can shrink the human head within the alleged costume so that it fits. I've noticed other channels on this subject ignore that little possibility. But then the suit has to be ridiculously large in total, and the position of the neck, eyes, and mouth seems a little wonky. It's extremely difficult to do it that way, and I can attest to that fact by citing pop culture. Even leading FX artists have trouble mimicking apes. Like in this costume from Planet of the Apes, from the 60s, I believe. See how a human head obviously fits, and aligns with the mouth, eyes, and nose. They can do more, but not less. So even the top production companies of the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s and 90s to an extent, couldn't really figure it out. I guess the rodeo rider managed it though. Here it is slowed to about 20%, and stabilized. Another red flag I had was that the subject doesn't appear to move at all. Well, what would something that is trying to look like a stump do? It would go still. Now obviously I don't know the footing it was on, but it is angled in such a way that suggests to me that it very well may be frozen in mid-step. Perhaps it noticed that the human witness, or maybe more relevantly, whatever the human witness was holding, was briefly aimed at it, so it went still, supporting itself with its arm in mid-step, only to continue on its merry way once the device was aimed elsewhere. And regarding the subject's lack of movement, I recently spoke to a witness who thought he saw an odd stump, and it didn't even register until he was down the road. And then when he returned, his suspicions were confirmed because there was no stump to be found. Does this blob look like a tree or stump? Sure. What do animals that camouflage try very hard to do? Of course the answer is that they try to look like their environment. And here's another example of the trickiness of photos. I took this photo just the other day while I was on a run. Believe it or not, there are 5 turkeys in this photo. 5. And this is, like, right next to me. I'm not ready to get behind this claim, but it has been suggested that the eyes are even visible in this. And I do see 2 somethings, but this photo is ambiguous enough, so I'm not ready to go that far. But it is intriguing. Intriguing that a piece of debris would have this feature. I want to mention that Michigan's Upper Peninsula, as well as northern Wisconsin, doesn't seem to get the credit it deserves in terms of remoteness. The sheer scope of the wilderness is vast. Short of the Rockies, this is just as desolate as anywhere else you're going to find in the continental U.S. And my stance on this has definitely evolved since I first started making videos on this subject. I used to think that an area had to be extremely desolate to support these creatures, but I'm not so sure about that anymore. I suppose I thought that because if there were a lot of people around, then there would be a lot of sightings, and then the creatures couldn't remain elusive. But now I've realized that it doesn't really matter how many sightings there are, because there are many, and few of them are shared, and even those that are shared, well, nothing is done about them. And that's fair, because what exactly are you supposed to do? I would guess that just about 99.99 repeating % of us don't have the resources, skill, lack of obligation, or the cunning to thoroughly and effectively prove a Bigfoot, regardless of how many times it's been spotted. Moe, a 42-year-old chimpanzee, escaped an animal sanctuary and fled into the San Bernardino foothills. Despite an impressive search effort involving helicopters and dogs, Moe was never found. And that's just a chimp who had spent his whole life in captivity, and quite an elderly one at that. This was all the way back in 2008. But I find this 1998 photo of Moe so powerful and heartbreaking. It seems some faulty wiring electrocuted his outside enclosure at the California home he lived at with his human parents, who had rescued him from poachers as an infant. The shock frightened him, and he got loose, and bit a police officer who had been summoned to help corral him. Moe had been shot with 2 tranquilizer darts by the time this photo was taken, and after being pursued by police for hours, he can be seen here running to a friend of the family for comfort. He just wanted to go home. And I think it's very telling, by the way, that evidently he could have escaped his enclosure whenever he wanted to, but simply didn't, until he thought he was in danger. After this unfortunate incident, he was forced to live at an animal sanctuary, and on his 39th birthday, his human parents made the weekly 3-hour drive to visit him. They brought sheet cake with raspberry filling, Moe's favorite, but other chimps in a separate enclosure didn't like the docile Moe getting cake. Primates can be quite envious, in case you didn't know, and 2 of them managed to escape, and Moe could only watch from behind his bars as his human parents were brutalized. Miraculously, they both survived, though permanently disfigured, missing digits, flesh, and extremities. A responding paramedic said the scene was worse than a grizzly bear mauling. 3 years later, Moe managed to make his escape. He was last seen by some construction workers, who saw him traversing a grassy field, heading toward the San Bernardino National Forest, to a mountain, of which he had a view of from his cage. And I find some comfort in the fact that at least he died somewhere he wanted to be. Somewhere with a view, and no bars between him and the sky. And I can't help but notice that no chimpanzee body or skeleton was ever found, which is curious. Raccoons, coyotes, foxes, and more recently, even black bears have all proven to have higher population densities in urban or urbanizing areas than they do in their natural habitat, which makes sense when you think about it, because we humans ooze resources and leave it in our wake. The Upper Peninsula is roughly 1/3 the size of the entire state of Michigan, and yet it's only 3% of the state's total population. According to the 2010 census, around 90% of the UP has less than 1 person per mile, which is really something to think about. Less than 1 person per square mile. And people say nothing can stay hidden. So believe it or not, I'm not naive. This very well could be a branch, and nothing more. But, I've never been able to shake the fact that, if Bigfoot exists, which nearly every qualified specialist, more or less, at least concedes the possibility of once they take the time to actually look over the evidence, then this right here, is honestly about what you'd expect to find in terms of photo capture. Anyway, make sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, because that is one of the best ways to help this channel, and really helps me a lot. But anyway, again, and as always, thanks an awful lot for listening, and until next time.